Hi, I'm Brooke. This is Conlee, and this is our Siberian Husky Muoi. And together we live on board Akalot, our 38-foot tiny home on the water. After a few weeks spent on boat projects and provisioning, we left Vancouver BC on December 25, 2020, with a long journey north ahead of us and our sights set on a summer cruising season spent in Alaska. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
We decided to spend our New Year's in Prudhoe Haven, one of our favorite anchorages in Desolation Sound. Especially during the off-season when it's not too busy, this is one of those places we feel like we could stay in forever. Although knowing that we had many more miles to make, and that it was only the beginning of our journey, we spent a couple days in the sunshine bringing in the new year, and then decided to take our next weather window to continue heading further north. We only ended up making it as far as Refuge Cove, where we stopped to visit our friends Paul and Carolyn on Jibito. We spent our time there hiking the trails and exploring the area. West Redonda Island, where Refuge Cove is located, is a pretty magical place. The ecology consists of the BC signature, tall, dark, misty coastal forests with thick moss and fern below, and rocky granite outcroppings covered in a beautiful array of mosses, lichens, liverworts, and fungi. There are small creeks and waterfalls everywhere, and the local who created this complex network of trails added a few extra thoughtful touches. Beside each stream that is safe to drink, he has placed 1 or 2 mugs so that passers-by may stop for a quick refreshment. Not much beats a cold drink of fresh creek water straight from the source. After nearly a week of exploring the wonderland of West Redonda and Refuge Cove, it was finally time to say goodbye to Desolation Sound and cross the Georgia Strait towards Discovery Passage. A nice stop as we headed north was Maud Island. It lies just north of Campbell River and Discovery Passage, and at the south entrance of the Seymour Narrows. The anchorage is quite protected and is a good place to wait for the slack tide to transit the Narrows, which can run at a maximum of 16 knots. Our timing worked out perfectly, and we ended up with nearly a full day to explore, most of which we spent watching the abundance of wildlife around the Narrows. The constant mixing of the rapids creates oxygen and nutrient exchange, and provides important food sources for the marine life in the area. With the late start from Maud Island to hit the Narrows at slack, and a much slower sail than we had anticipated up the rest of Discovery Passage, darkness was fast approaching and we decided to turn into Otter Cove. We had just enough time to do a bit of exploring on one of the small islets in the bay. Then it was time for supper and a much-needed rest as we had yet another big day ahead. The next morning we made the last mile to round Chatham Point and headed west into the mighty Johnstone Strait. The Johnstone Strait has some of the deepest and fastest flowing waters on the BC coast, which makes it a prime spot to view the cetaceans that thrive in this environment and frequently transit this stretch of water. It would have been great to get more filming done, but with a mix of every type of weather, including regular willy-waws rolling down off the mountaintops, and the swiftly flowing water full of large logs and other debris, our focus was on Acklet, the water ahead, making regular sail changes, and arriving safely to our next anchorage. With finicky winds, a gale in the forecast, and strong current through Current Passage in the Earl Ledge, we found ourselves motoring our last 5 miles towards Blenkinsop Bay. The main channel just past Kelsey Bay was dark and stormy over the silhouettes of Newcastle Ridge to the south. Even with a few rays of sun trying to peek through, everything was the calm before the storm, and seemed to be blanketed in a soft silvery glow. We ended up staying in Blenkinsop for nearly a week, where we did some dinghy exploring up the Tuna River. The river shores were exceptionally lush and looked like something out of the classic childhood movie Fern Gully. We also went fishing off the point, and after following some long and rather disappointing logging roads, decided to stick to the trails under the remaining forest canopy. We had a few encounters with the locals while exploring, and Conlee may have had a little mishap with our bear-proof dog food bin, which just happened to open itself wide, spilling almost 10 kilograms of expensive gourmet kibble down into the depths of the stern locker. A mishap Conlee wasn't stoked about, although the bird life around us sure didn't object to the free meal. Early one morning we got a good preview of just how unpredictable winter weather can be. The forecast had called for 25 knots, and by 5 a.m. our wind indicator showed 49 knots at the masthead.
Good morning, just off the Johnstone Strait. Looks like a beautiful morning out here, but it wasn't so beautiful about an hour ago, and we seem to have lost our dinghy overnight. So we got our backup dinghy, or as Conlee likes to call it, our bike. And we're going on a rescue mission. Got the whole family here. Hopefully it's safe and sound somewhere on the beach over here. There she is!
Right where we left her.
Right where we left her.
After that stormy and somewhat stressful morning, we were super relieved to have recovered the dinghy and enjoyed the blue skies and sunshine that followed with some kayaking around the bay. Next, we are off to the historical hideaway of Port Neville. This was originally the site of several First Nations villages, but in the late 1800s, prime timber began attracting hand loggers, a few of which moved to and settled in the bay. In 1891, a fellow by the name of Sven Hans Hansen arrived at Port Neville, where he built his homestead, which later became this general store, and Sven the first postmaster of Port Neville. The next day we got some good weather to continue heading west up the Johnstone Strait towards the Havana Channel. After a couple hours spent tacking up the narrow Havana Channel, and with the winds continuing to pick up, we tacked into the lee of Hull Island and decided to tuck into Matilpe, located on the mainland only 15 nautical miles northeast of Port Neville, and the site of an ancient First Nations settlement. The setting was beautiful and yet felt slightly haunted. The shell-midden beach glowed white even in the darkness, and I half expected to see a ghost walking the shorelines. The next day we found some of the more recent remnants of the village that were left behind, now overgrown in thick moss and fern. Once again, the next leg of our journey had to be timed just right, so after a quick walk and filling up some water from the creek, we weighed anchor and headed for the Chatham Channel. The recommendations for the Chatham Channel are that it to be traveled at slack tide and shoreline navigational aids be followed to mark the proper route through the narrow passage. The perfect weather presented itself, and we were fortunate enough to carry on in such a short time. Next stop was Cutter Cove, where we'd heard there was some great fishing. After a couple days spent at Cutter Cove, we head off towards the Broughton Archipelago, our next stop, Crease Island and the Goat Islands anchorage. We did some exploring around the small islets in the anchorage and visited the neighboring Berry Island, where we hiked a few trails and wandered the beaches. We also stopped to visit a rock formation called the Chief's Bathtub, an eroded depression in the cliff that fills with water at high tide, and where pictographs are visible just above the high tide line. Next, we are off toward Port McNeill to load up on fuel, water, and food in preparation for our trip up the Central Coast. I was also adamant we make one very important touristy stop while we were in town.
It's the largest pearl in the world!
We also figured out some ways to save on power, as it was becoming evident that our solar and wind generation abilities just weren't going to cut it during these winter months.
So we've just done a bit of light provisioning here in Port McNeill, getting ready to head up the Central Coast and be away from civilization again for another month or two. So in case you're curious, we've got fresh veggies, fruits, dairy products, eggs and stuff like that. A lot of stuff that we choose is based on how long it will keep, and we buy it in different increments of ripeness, I guess you could say. Another thing is we really want to save power this time of year because we don't have a lot of solar and we don't want to run the generator very much. So what we do is we have converted our fridge into just a drink cooler, so it doesn't run at all. And then we have converted our bow locker into our walk-in fridge. So we store all of our fruits and veggies and eggs and cheese and dairy products, anything like that, in these tubs. All stackable, pretty easy to access. And then we've got a little thermometer here to make sure that it stays cool. And we keep our front hatch open just a little bit to let in a bit of cool air, keep all the air circulating, which really helps. But yeah, it's saved us a lot of power so far, and every day we're learning something new about how to be more efficient with the way that we're living. So it's pretty cool.
After Port McNeill, we made a quick stop at Beaver Harbour and the Cattle Islands to wait out a forecasted southeast gale. On our way across the Queen Charlotte Strait, we made a quick overnight stop at the shelter anchorage in the Walker Group. Early the next morning, we carried on with our crossing towards Murray's Labyrinth. The entrance to Murray's Labyrinth is a narrow dogleg through rocky islets and kelp gardens, but the anchorage is beautiful and well protected from strong winds out in the strait. We stayed here for a few days as it was a great place to explore by dinghy while waiting for a good weather window to round Cape Caution. Might as well. Can't see anything.
We're gonna make it through. No matter what.
Go to this side a bit. The rock is over here.
Wow.
Okay, now keep to this side a little bit. Now straight ahead. Keep straight ahead. Ooh. Oh. Up, 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 up. Oh.
Whoop.
Oh. We're here. Come on. Oh. There wasn't a lot of exploring to be done on shore as the trees grow thick down to the high tide line, and the low foreshore can be a bit of a slow go. But we made sure Muoi got her bathroom breaks and then spent the rest of the time fishing and getting acquainted with the area by dinghy. We didn't have any luck fishing, so we decided to grab some mussels to use as crab bait and try our hand at that instead. These are California mussels, which unlike the blue or bay mussels more frequently seen on the southern coast, prefer areas of more open coastline where the salinity is high. These mussels can grow up to 10 inches long and can be very hard to pry from the rocks to which they cling. As we headed back to the boat in time for dark, we noticed that a full moon was rising just over the trees behind Aklat. What a beautiful way to end our final day on the southern coast. Thanks so much for watching. As we live most of our lives out of the cellular and Wi-Fi service area, the best way to get updated on our next episode is to click subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. Join us next time as we round Cape Caution and continue our journey north.